Hello guys, good morning. This is Dileep Nigam, CEO of SimpliExcel Training International and Certified John Maxwell Coach. SimpliExcel is in the business of offering coaching and mentorship and training programs on the leadership principles taught by John Maxwell to corporates and other institutions. And I have the honor and privilege of having with me today Walter Udell, ex-Vice President of BC Hydro Project Delivery. And Walter is with me and he has been with BC Hydro for over 40 years. A long accomplished career at BC Hydro. Walter was also awarded, Walter's group was in fact awarded the Global PMO of the Year Award for 2016. Since his retirement, Walter has been running a consulting company and serving the project delivery and portfolio management areas. So welcome Walter, I appreciate you being with me. So before we start with the interview, Walter, I would request you to share a little bit about yourself before we go into the body of the interview.
Well, thanks, Dileep. Good morning, and it's good to see you again.
Good morning.
Yeah, so for my background, I was raised in the small community of Valemount, BC.
Yep.
We lived on the edge of town in a log house with no electricity, no water, but that was pretty typical for the 1950s.
Right.
Only the local hotel and a couple of houses had electricity at the time, but it shows you how much things have changed since the 50s. My father's family were a pioneer family. They came to Canada at the end of the American Revolutionary War with the British Army, and they moved into Ontario in 1790.
Right.
My grandfather came west a little over 100 years ago, and my father was born in Stettler, Alberta, 100 years ago this year. So my father was a World War II veteran.
Wow.
And I think that influences the children of veterans.
Absolutely.
He landed in Normandy on the 12th of June, 1944. And he made his way through France and Belgium and Holland and Germany and Denmark. At the end of the war, he was at Hamburg. So my father took on a lot of leadership roles in our community. And he consistently demonstrated that he expected nothing in return for his contributions. My mother was a war bride from London. She is a strong individual. She's still alive. She's 92 now. And she drilled into her kids several things. The first was, the world doesn't owe you a living.
Okay. Okay.
And the second is, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well.
Right.
I enjoyed sports in my youth.
Okay.
I played a lot of hockey. I played fastball. I worked in the construction and in the forestry and lumber business for a few years before I went to university, where I obtained my degree in civil engineering at UBC.
Right.
And joined BC Hydro at the time when the Peace and the Columbia projects were still being developed.
Right.
And that had a very strong influence on my career. I worked for 8 years on the construction at site of the Revelstoke generating station.
Right.
And went on to work for a number of years in construction management. And then I transitioned into project planning and project management. And then eventually into senior management.
Right.
I've had the opportunity several times during my career of leading the project delivery function at BC Hydro.
Right.
The last was as the Vice President of Project Delivery,
right.
Responsible for generation, transmission, and substation projects in the company. I also, for many years, had the role of the Principal Engineer for Project Management, and as such, I was responsible for the practice of project management in the company.
Right. Wow. That was a short summary of a huge accomplished career of 40 years at BC Hydro.
Thank you.
Really, very impressive. Now, Walter, you have been with BC Hydro for 40 years, which is a very long career path. Now, I'm sure you had your major wins over there. So would you like to share a couple of key wins over there?
Well, I'll focus on one. And, when I started my career, projects were dominated by the design management and the construction management practices.
Right.
And over the course of my career, I had the opportunity to see and participate in those practices being supplemented by a project management discipline. Mm-hmm. And so I had the opportunity over about 3 decades to see that practice mature in the company. And that was, for me, a significant success. And I would say that the factors that sort of led to that, well, I think, if you're going to, you need a business imperative.
Yes.
And so for our organization, the number of projects we had, the size, the inherent risks that are in the projects, it really drove the company to invest in project management.
Yes.
I would say the second factor would be when you're going through that transition, that initial transition, you need some strong and capable management. And BC Hydro had Glenn Smurl, who came in to manage that transition and did a very effective job. He really laid the foundation for the key aspects of project management. Right. Then I'd say you've got to develop an effective community of practice.
Yes.
So, the project management practitioners and participants have that opportunity to share their experiences and get collegial support and the rest, as well as access to the practices themselves. And I would say lastly, to me it's important to drive for best practices and best tools so that the practitioners can be successful in organizing and implementing their projects.
Sure. I'm sure that was a huge accomplishment, that bringing in project management practice inside and then overall, integrating the whole subject.
Well, there were some challenging times. It wasn't always easy, but I think it was a worthwhile venture.
That's right. On the flip side, I'm sure you have had your own tough moments through this journey of 40 years. So do you recall some of the toughest moments of your career path, and how did you overcome them, and what were the lessons learned there?
Yeah. Well, you can't work for 40 years on projects without having a few rough spots.
Yep, absolutely.
For me, the roughest spot was I made a particular presentation on a project.
Okay.
That was not well received.
Okay.
And so I was in the penalty box with my manager and some others at the time. Mm-hmm. That was a particularly rough spot for me.
Okay.
Definitely, I felt it at the time.
Okay.
So how did I get through that? Well, I would say I fell back on my values. Mm-hmm. I really took it as an opportunity to examine my career and my objectives.
Right.
And I set some objectives both for my personal life and for my career. Mm-hmm. And now looking back in hindsight, my greatest successes came after that tough spot. And so it's you can make it through those tough spots.
Yes, that's right. And that's the beauty about the tough spots, that once you complete the journey, you definitely have great lessons learned there, for the rest of the journey. Now, if you have to remember the most memorable day of your success journey, what would that be?
That's pretty tough. I mean, the 40 years of projects, you have a lot of incredible days.
Yes.
But if I was going to pick one, and maybe it's because it's most recent, it was a few months after I retired.
Okay.
And my successor, Ken McKenzie, gave me a call and let me know that we had been successful and had been awarded the Global PMO of the Year award in 2016. That was a great sense of accomplishment.
Wow, I'm sure.
Took a long time.
Yes.
But it was worth the ride.
Yep. Winning Global PMO of the Year award is really a great accomplishment, no doubt about it. It's a global level. receiving that kind of acknowledgement is really worth it.
Yeah, and then I would say earlier in the year, we had brought in from the States an auditor, a senior auditor, for PMI's organizational maturity model.
Right.
And we were assessed, we got the highest assessment of any organization worldwide. And that sort of led us into our application to the PMO of the year and of course winning the award. So.
Wow. I'm sure a feeling of accomplishment and happy feeling was there. Now, in the career path, most of the time when we start, we always are bestowed with some strong areas as strengths in ourselves. And certain things we achieve it on the way. So what were your key strong areas and what are the areas you had to work on to accomplish big goals in life?
Yeah, well, I would say that the values instilled in me by my parents as a child,
Absolutely.
My work ethic,
Right.
my sense of responsibility and commitment. I think that's I never strove to advance organizationally. Right. I would say what tended to drive me was a sense of responsibility to those around me and to the community in a broader sense.
Right.
Those were the strengths I brought to it, and I brought to the table when I was a young person. And when I was a young lad, I was introverted.
Okay.
I didn't speak a lot. I sat in the last row in the class.
Okay.
And so learning to be thoughtful in how you respond to people.
Okay.
To be more transparent.
Right.
And to be open with your communications, I think was the stuff that was a challenge for me. I mean, people have told me from time to time that I can be hard to read.
Okay. Okay. Now, success principles also say that high self-esteem and high self-image is key to one's success. Now, some people have it upfront at a very early stage, but some people attain it on the journey. So in your case, as a young Walter, did you always had a very high self-image or you developed it going forward?
I would say it would be the second.
Okay.
I think I always had a sense of my shortcomings and some areas where I had some strength. But for me, as I said earlier, it wasn't so much my self-image that drove me into leadership. It was that sense of responsibility that really drove me into leadership roles. I never really aspired to be a vice president. That's the way it ended up.
It came through the journey, right? Yeah. Now, if you have to identify one person in your career path who really helped you accomplish a lot, who would that person be?
Can I offer a couple?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would say that some of my early managers, like Locke Russell, Ralph Spinney, Glenn Smurl, these individuals opened doors of opportunity for me.
Wow.
They placed their trust in me.
Yes.
And they gave me support when I needed it. But secondly, I've had many very talented direct reports and staff over the course of my career.
Yes.
And any success I achieved is attributed to them.
Very well said.
Lastly, you talk about greatest impact on my life.
Yeah.
That person is Jesus Christ, who, because of his example and his teachings, had the most profound impacts on me as an individual.
Very well said, yeah. Another principle of success is failing forward, where it says that you fail forward, get up again, learn from the lessons and move on. So if you have to recall, what was the biggest failures or most favorite failure of your life and what were the lessons learned from there?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to stick to projects with this particular question, and maybe get just a little bit technical with this question or with this answer. And so over the course of my career at the company, but across industry, what I saw as the situations that caused the greatest problems or the failures on projects was the lack of attention to a project life cycle. So this is the concept of making the right decision at the right time with the right amount of information, and is vital to the successful delivery of project management. So, you know, what did I learn out of that? The importance of having a good, well-developed project life cycle.
Right.
And that can't just be developed and put on a shelf someplace. It needs to be understood by the whole organization.
Right.
Right up to the top of the house. And it needs to be discussed and improved as you develop and mature your practice.
Right. That's right. Now, if you have to identify something about yourself which many people don't know and they'll be surprised to know that, what would that be?
Well, my passion outside of work has been for many years Canadian and Western European history.
Right.
Now, a lot of people already know that about me, but that's really my passion outside of work.
Wow, that's nice. And if you were to identify one or two people, when the word successful comes into your mind, who would that be?
There's a lot of very successful people.
Right.
I guess the person that comes to my mind is Churchill. I think he was a man for his time.
Right.
I think he had the courage of his convictions, and against great odds, he moved forward, and I think history has proven him to have been correct.
Right. Okay, that's nice. Now, if you had to identify 3 success habits which you would recommend the future generation to follow, what would that be?
Well, the first would be take the time to envision and plan.
Right.
I think it's important that you've got a clear end state that you're looking to drive towards, and you've got a plan and how you will get there, and to refresh these things on an ongoing basis. That would be the first thing that I would speak to. The second would be just to build and develop strong teams, and be supportive of your staff.
Right.
And I think that one is sort of self-evident.
Yep.
Lastly, I would say be inquisitive, be curious, be open, seek input on your practices, your personal approach on many things.
Yep.
And learn from that feedback.
That's right. I think they were very good. And lastly, if you had to share one lesson with the new generation, what would that be? Well,
I've worked on many projects over the course of my career. Just in the last 5 years, my group put over 500 projects in service.
Yeah.
And during the course of those projects, I can't tell you how many times people told me that's impossible.
Okay.
So I would say to those project managers and teams that are grappling with difficult circumstances today and in the future, you can do great things.
Yep.
So I would say with strong teams, you can do quite often the improbable and the impossible on occasion.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great, profound statement. And lastly, if you had to define success, what would that be?
I would say leaving your country, your province, your community, the world in better shape than you found it.
That's right. Beautiful. That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Walter. Really appreciate your time and sharing your wisdom with the people. And I'm sure your story is going to be of huge motivation to many. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dileep.